Yes, Dandadan Season 2 is struggling, or yes, Dandadan Season 2 is in trouble. I'm not sure what the title of this video will end up being. Despite being a fairly high-profile production with plenty of highlights both in terms of animation and direction, Dandadan is not without its behind-the-scenes issues, and this is especially true for the second season. Be it the disastrously messy staff lists or the subtle visual cracks in the final product that most casual fans won't even notice, Dandadan is struggling. I think I'll make that the title. As such, let's talk about Dandadan, the good, the bad, and what's to come. Make sure to subscribe, that's what Hero Himmel would do, subscribe. Also, you can now become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, custom hand-drawn badges next to your name when you comment, exclusive emojis, personal shoutouts, and more. All you have to do is go down there and press the join button. And with all that out of the way, let's get to it. Now, before we go through the actual animation in detail, let's get a few things out of the way. Firstly, the staff. Dandadan is directed by Fuga Yamashiro, a debuting series director who is a protege of the legendary Masaki Yuasa, co-founder of Studio Science Saru. Being from an unorthodox animation production background, Yamashiro has his own set of unique film-inspired directorial philosophies, but we'll talk about those in a bit. As expected from a high-profile Science Saru project, Dandadan has access to a strong pool of talent. It boasts multiple appearances from freelancers like Tetsuya Rikitoku, Momofuji, and more, as well as active participation from Science Saru affiliated talent such as Shuto Enomoto, Moko-chan, Haotian Gan, I probably butchered that, and Saitowa aka Gentai Shimori. Basically, the show has a strong core staff to work with and the ability to attract other high-profile talent like Hayato Kurosaki, Hironori Tanaka, and more for one-off appearances. Things, however, aren't perfect. As you may know, the anime industry is always home to productions with overlapping staff lists, forcing said staff to prioritize one production over another. Look at character designer Naoyuki Onda, for example. He is an incredible artist whose designs tend to have a wonderful sense of three-dimensionality and volume. And if he was there to reinforce his own designs as the CAD, the quality of drawings in this show would have been a lot higher. Sadly, he wasn't there to reinforce his designs for most of this show. He was the CAD for episodes 1, 2, and 5, and that's it. Why? Well, if I had to guess, I'd say it's because of MF Ghost Season 2, another show Onda is the character designer for. Unlike Dandadan, Onda did a lot of correction work for MF Ghost, especially for the back end, which probably coincided with Dandadan's production, leading to his decreased participation in the latter. On a similar note, the aliens/yokai in this anime are designed by the one and only Yoshimichi Kameda, but he too hasn't corrected or animated anything for this show. This is of course because he's busy with Yaiba, a show he's the character designer and the sole CAD for. Long story short, strong staff list, but a few missed opportunities which could have probably been fixed with better planning. And that was the staff. Let's now talk about time, a resource most modern anime productions lack. And let me make something very clear, Dandadan is not a smooth production whatsoever. It is not a healthy production. For some reason, fans of this show get really upset when you say that, but their misinformed denial won't change the truth. Dandadan is a messy production. It's not as as say Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, but it's not exactly smooth either. Both the staff list and the final product are proof of that. We know the anime was pitched around 2 years before it started airing, and we know the first core was finished months before the first episode aired. We know that because the entire thing got leaked ahead of time. Less than 2 years between a project being pitched and the production wrapping up, that's not a lot of time. Especially because production doesn't just start after being pitched. There's an entire pre-production phase that comes first. Why did they rush to finish Season 1 ahead of time instead of working on the back end while the first few episodes aired? Because if they didn't, Season 2 would be Season 2 started airing 6 months after Season 1 wrapped up. They obviously needed more time than that to finish it, so they completed Season 1 as soon as possible and moved on to Season 2. In fact, Season 2 has 2 different series directors, the aforementioned Fuga Yamashiro and Abel Gongora, and the latter confirmed that his inclusion in that role wasn't pre-planned, presumably meaning it was done because of how messy things were behind the scenes. Basically, neither season had a particularly healthy schedule, and it shows. Those staff lists are rough. Now, I often associate high animation director and second key animator accounts with crumbling productions, but some of you might not be aware of the correlation. As such, here's a brief explanation. An animation director corrects the animation, tweaking the drawings and movement. Ideally, one AD handles the entire episode, but if the time allotted is less, the episode is divided into sections and each section is assigned to a different AD, and that way multiple sections of the episode can be corrected parallelly, saving time but at the cost of visual cohesion. Basically, the longer the AD list, the more fragmented the episode was, and by inference, the less time it had. Of course, there's a bit more nuance to it. If an episode moves more and/or has more complicated designs and/or lacks experienced talent and/or is strict with its design reinforcements, it'll need more AD input. The second key animator credit is more straightforward. It's basically cleanup, which ideally shouldn't even exist. Basically, less time means more people needed to clean up the works of key animators because they couldn't do so themselves. Now, you might be thinking that it's practically impossible to have an episode with 1 AD and 0 second key animators in this day and age. Well, that's not true, and the proof of that is airing as we speak. Both episodes of Kyoto Animation City featured 1 AD and no second key animators, although it is KyoAni, the gold standard that other studios simply cannot touch. A recent My Hero Academia episode did feature 0 second key animators, so there's at least some hope. Anyway, back to Dandadan. The very first episode of this show featured an entire army of ADs and second key animators, 18 and 55 plus respectively, and the first episode of season 2 was even worse, requiring 14 ADs and over 67 second key animators, all for an episode that didn't even move that much. Obviously, none of that's good. Here's an example that'll put things into perspective perfectly. Think of what the best looking episode from this show is. That's right, episode 7. Let's compare the staff list of episode 7 with that of episode 6 and 8, both of which moved a lot less and were far less polished. Episode 7 needed around 20 second key animators compared to episode 6 and 8's 62 plus and 52 respectively. As for ADs, episode 6 needed 20, episode 8 needed 10, and episode 7 needed 1, 2 if you're being pedantic. Also, the sole animation director Shuto Enomoto was also the storyboard artist, the clothing and prop designer, and the main key animator for this episode. If it wasn't for those additional duties, he could have easily corrected everything himself. Now, why is there such a drastic difference between episode 7 and every other episode? Because episode 7 was extremely high priority. It was given a lot of extra time, which in turn led to it looking incredibly polished. That's the difference time can make, and messy staff lists are just an indicator of set time or lack thereof. Sadly, animation isn't the only department that's affected by a lack of time. Every single aspect suffers. The color design / compositing, for example. Since the start, Dandadan has made use of strong one-note color palettes. It's one of director Yamashiro's philosophies. He thinks of these colors as a representation of the supernatural. Once those quirky colors take over the screen, our protagonists are no longer in their safe, comfy world. They have entered the realm of the supernatural. Cool concept, but this color use can be a mixed bag. Near the start, it felt deliberate. It didn't mess with the drawings, it didn't feel cheap, there was purpose behind it. Sadly, that changed quickly. The more recent color palettes feel extremely last minute and counterproductive. They drown out the hand-drawn lines, clash with the other layers, and just don't look appealing in general. Now yes, a part of it is due to the color choice. Some colors just don't work, green and yellow in particular, but that's not the only reason. You see, when the color and photography departments are strapped for time, color use becomes less about accommodating each layer and implementing accents carefully, and more about just slapping an accent and calling it a day. Ambitious color use, just like ambitious storyboards, need time to execute, time being something Dandadan obviously lacks. This results in color use that can only be described as procedural and uninspired. And with all that out of the way, we can finally talk about the animation, the actual pen-on-paper 2D animation. Took us a while, but we got there eventually. Let's go through the season sequentially. Episode 1 was the weakest one so far. Directed by Kayona Yamada, who directed an incredible Dr. Stone episode recently, and storyboarded by Jong Hyo, it had plenty of those subtle visual cracks I was talking about near the start. This shot, for example, the drawings are quite off model and the animation looks broken. The proportions of Momo's jaw as she turns are quite inconsistent. Here's another example. The contact point in this shot, the physical point where her arm makes contact with her face, is very poorly implemented. It looks less like her hand is pressing against her cheek and more like her entire bone structure is changing. Small stuff like that was present throughout the episode. Gigi's turn hair, for example, looks very stiff, and the jittery in-betweens, especially around his arm, don't help. The short bit of character acting that follows is also very janky, with stiff motion and highly inconsistent lines. Basically, lots of jank and inconsistent movement, which for an episode that doesn't really move all that much is definitely concerning. Also, off-model drawings, lots and lots and lots of off-model drawings. There was just a general lack of polish throughout the episode. Of course, it wasn't all bad, there were a few animation highlights. Loved this dynamic shot with shifting perspectives, also the snappy, well-executed character acting here, almost certainly drawn by Yu Yoshiyama, looked quite good. The action near the end was also fairly well done, with the storyboarding in particular being quite impressive. The shots made use of these warped, dynamic background illustrations. They framed exchanges normally, then instead of cutting away to a different shot, used the warp of the background to change perspectives and continue with the same shot, which was really cool. Animation-wise, there wasn't anything particularly mind-blowing. This kick looked cool. Of course, they reused the layout from episode 1, but they had to account for the difference in Momo's outfit and her opponent, so it wasn't just a simple reuse. Also, this quirky, energetic hand-to-hand exchange animated by Kyohei Ibata looked quite good. Episode 2 was a lot stronger visually. It was directed by Yoshihiko Mori and storyboarded by long-term KyoAni talent Eisaku Kawanami, and while it did have those typical off-model drawings and janky cuts, it also boasted a large amount of animation power. This sequence was one of my favorites. Animated by Shihong Lee, it featured some insanely complex background animation and these loose, off-model but in a good way drawings. This stylized cut with these crayon-like textures, presumably drawn by Yoshihide Ideue, was great, and this cut drawn by Saitoa was a highlight. The stylized artwork consisting of wobbly pencil-like lines complete with these sketchy highlights looked amazing, and the movement was genuinely mesmerizing. Speaking of stylized drawings, here's a quick shot of Okarun with cool wobbly proportions. Also, the background perspective is great. You have the initial angular frame which then pans to reveal the warp in the background, leading to a change in perspective. A very consistently drawn rotation and some cool dynamic action then brings us to the animation highlight. Animated by Saitoa, you can see the amazing perspective work from the get-go. Look how much of the screen Gigi takes up, his hand being the closest to the camera and his foot being the furthest away. You also have this shot with the slightly exaggerated, almost Nakaya Onsen-like perspective on his jaw and the flickering shadows. This too is off-model technically speaking, but it's an intentional stylistic choice. Also loved these flowy, loose, highly stylized impact frames, plus some really cool freeform body mechanics here, which is always a joy to watch. Long story short, a very solid episode with plenty of dynamic, energetic action, but not one without its issues. Episode 3 was the best one so far. It was directed and storyboarded by Tetsuya Wakano, and it looked surprisingly consistent. The staff list for it was comparatively neater, with a marginally lower AD and a substantially lower second key animator count, and the episode had a lot less of those subtle visual cracks I was talking about. The drawings actually looked good for the most part, and the amount of movement was quite high. I'll briefly go over my favorite shots from this episode instead of covering the whole thing, because 1, while the episode did look good and move a lot, it wasn't exactly a Sakuga fest, and 2, look how long this video is already. Loved this quirky low angle shot. The perspective is quite extreme, with all the Okarun feet close-up you can possibly hope for, and a partially animated background. The corridor he's running down is hand animated frame by frame, while the background at a distance is a static illustration. The animation highlight from this episode was drawn by One Peach, who, yes, in case you were wondering, has worked on One Piece before, and holy fucking shit, this is some of the most insane background animation I've seen in a while. This entire area reminds me of the Infinity Castle from Demon Slayer in that it consists of a lot of buildings meshed together, and what that means is that a lot of individual shapes and structures need to be accounted for while animating. With that in mind, this is genuinely bonkers. Animating such a large landscape frame by frame with a remarkable amount of consistency despite the shifting perspectives is really insane. I believe he had a 3D base to work with, but still, it's incredible. This flurry of strikes looked cool, some impressive body mechanics and a lot of weight conveyed by heavy smearing, although the actual animation wasn't exactly mind-blowing. The storyboarding here was quite cool. The one continuous high-angle shot looked amazing, and Saitoa's sequence was another highlight. Incredible sense of weight and force here. Even the trees in the background are warped to accentuate the directional movement. Also, a large amount of hand-animated debris can be seen near the end. Besides these highlights, the episode featured plenty of movement and even some decent character acting. On top of that, the compositing looked a lot more polished this time around, especially near the end. The use of orange and purple highlights was really pleasing to look at. Overall, a surprisingly consistent episode. And that was Dandadan Season 2 for you, a high-profile production that is strapped for time but is still capable of animating plenty of highlights. Moving forward, I expect both inconsistencies a la Episode 1 and major highlights, hopefully a la Season 1 Episode 7. And that's about it. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. A special thanks to Nude03, Powell, and Amir for becoming Tier 3 members, and until next time.